You need a body shop? You need engine repair? Auto Excellence, Collision Specialists, 631-261-6420. That's 631-261-6420. Auto Excellence.
And APB, American Protection Bureau, voted #1 best on Long Island for all your security needs. Call 631-390-9050. That's 631-390-9050. APB.
Through the pain, but look at us now on a Sunday time. Have we seen our finest hour? Good times surely will come. All I know is people talk without listening. What I'm saying is life's too short to live in these extremes. Have we seen our finest hour? Good times surely will come. And all through the night I wondered and waited, for it's been said, united we stand, divided we fall. To wait here for you, holding it together, just like a desert flower, waiting on the rain to come. And all I know,
we made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I gotta find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, hey, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Spasciano, joined as always by the original Long Island Iced Bee himself, Benny Scala. Benny, kind of a, what do they call that? A mixed blessing of sorts, double-bladed sword tonight. Good show, plus a little bit of sad news. But other than that, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Dan. Yeah, I met a great girl the other day.
I met a great girl. How's that going for you?
Well, so far so good. We actually like to take long walks, and it's really, really nice. Except I noticed that she always stops at fire hydrants, and then she runs after the mailman.
Oh, jeez. You got to stop meeting women at the SPCA, Benny.
Right.
It's a shame, Benny. We talked about it top of the hour last week. Another loss in the wrestling community. We were supposed to do a different show tonight, but we wanted to kind of transition. So why don't you kind of tell everybody what the original plan was, and then how we're gonna honor what our plans were tonight.
Yeah. So a little bit different show today. Normally we have a guest, and actually tonight our guest was going to be Mike Mantar-Halleck, and sadly he passed away the week before last. And so the first part of the show is going to be a tribute to Mike. And there's a lot of things about Mike that most of the average wrestling fans don't know. And then after that, we're going to talk about the worst gimmicks of all time. And we could probably stay on this topic for the rest of the year until Boogie Claws.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we talked back and forth, and it was because you posted some pictures. How many months ago was that? You ran into Mike in Florida, and that kind of was what got the ball rolling for booking him on the show.
That was in April. We met at Sam's Beach Bar in Hudson. Mike Monty actually came down for some business, and Mike Mantar lived in, I think, Cape Coral, which was about 3 hours away. So he drove up, and we all hung out for the evening. It was a great time. So it was only, 3 months ago.
Okay, yeah, because we had him booked originally a couple weeks back. We had to reschedule due to so he had a personal issue, and we were going to have him on tonight. You got the late night call. I saw the message. Yeah, unfortunately, life has a bad way of catching up to you.
Yeah, and I mean the sad thing is he had done a TikTok video. I think it was like 4 days before he passed, and it was almost kind of chilling because he said, "You only die once, but you live every day." And then 4 days later, he was gone. It's just something for everybody to kind of take note of. That you never know. You never know when your time is up.
That's true. It reminded me of Jim Hellwig, when he patched things up and had the Hall of Fame ceremony, and he came out on Monday Night Raw, and he cut that promo about your heart beats its last breath, and no matter what happens in life, you live on indefinitely, and then died walking to his car the next only a few hours later the next morning.
That was like within 24 hours, wasn't it? Yeah.
And I mean, so sometimes stuff gets prophetic, but looking at Mike, I mean, everybody focuses so much on the Mantar gimmick just because it came out in the era, it came out, and obviously it's I don't want to, it's hard to talk about it without sounding critical. So I'm going to dance around that, but it wasn't going to highlight WrestleMania or anything. But Mike, you had a couple of points. He was billed during his years as being from Crete, but you mentioned he actually,
Crete, yes.
Yeah, he was born and grew up in Omaha.
Yes. And actually neighbors with Mad Dog Vachon, Maurice Mad Dog Vachon, a former AWA multiple-time world champion. Mm-hmm. And he actually, when Mike decided he wanted to go into wrestling, he sent him first to Minneapolis to Eddie Sharkey. And then when Mike decided that training just wasn't working for him, I guess people don't really know that Mike Halleck was even though they just looked at this big giant guy and thought that that was his whole thing. But he actually was a 4-time in high school finalist in the state wrestling championships, won the state championship twice, and I believe he was actually in consideration for the Olympic team. That's how good he was.
Right.
And so then he eventually finished his wrestling training under Boris Malenko.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he passed up a scholarship to Oklahoma.
Right.
When he pursued wrestling. I mean, and you're talking Midwest, Nebraska, Oklahoma, that area. You think about literally the image of the corn-fed middle American, I hate to say fat farm boy, but the fat farm boy wrestler. And he was one of the best in the state, one of the best in the country. So that is a testament.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because initially, at the age of, I think, 7, his passion was hockey. It wasn't wrestling. And I mean, I have these mental images of Mike Mantar Halleck, skating down the ice on a breakaway. Like if I was the goalie, I'd just move out of the way. Here, you can score.
See, I'd put a guy that size in the goal. Like, good luck sneaking
the
puck
exactly.
in a 5-hole.
Who's going to get one by him? Right, exactly.
Yeah. Although he'd probably make a good enforcer, just go out there and just beat the tar out of somebody for.
I don't think anybody's going to try to cross-check him to try to get the puck. Just a guess.
No, not when you're that size and that tough. But yeah, he trains under Malenko. He wrestled most of his career with the Catch Wrestling Association. And what was it you were saying before? Something about him and Ted DiBiase?
Well, so let me backtrack a little bit. PN News, whose real name was Paul New, they actually, if you look at Mantar and you look at Paul New, they actually have they look very similar.
Mhm.
And the way that all came down was Mike Halleck, Mantar, was in a bar, and Paul New's brother, Johnny, came up to him and said, "Why are you ignoring me?" Johnny, I mean, he looked so much like PN News that Mike thought that's who Mike thought, Johnny thought it was, that it was his own brother. I mean, that's how similar they looked. And I guess that got, Johnny hooked up Mike with Paul, PN News, and that's how he got the gig initially in catch wrestling under Otto Vons, and former AWA champion who actually bought the title. But while in Germany, he got this. DiBiase was over there right after his initial run in WWF, and Ted told him, you got a great look. You're very good in the ring. Now he was wrestling as Bruiser Mastino with a gangster gimmick, but using a lot of his wrestling.
Not to be confused with
the other Bruiser
Mastino, who would go on to become Kane, Glenn
one
Jacobs.
Of Kane's many gimmicks, right? Yeah. Exactly, but DiBiase told him that he would place a call to McMahon, and then eventually Mike got the call and came back to the States.
And I think it's worth noting during when he transitioned to the Bruiser Mastino, his first match was actually a victory over Nikolai Volkov on a house show.
Yeah, I think he wrestled 2 matches in house shows, both as Bruiser, and he scored 2 victories over Nikolai. And then they, I guess, took about a 3 or 4 month break, I guess, while they repackaged him. And then he came back as Mantar, and he, went on a major role. I guess when he wrestled Scott Hall, at that point he was billed as undefeated. I think he had probably lost a couple of matches at house shows, but and he lost that match, which is the match that most people remember him by a count out to Scott Hall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he talked about it on his show, but obviously Mantar had a short-lived connection with Jim Cornette. He was his manager for a few shows. Now, it's important to point out back then they would film the Saturday night shows, a couple of shows at a time. So they would film several weeks in advance, kind of like anybody today that goes, or I should say maybe not live now, but the early days of NXT when they were at when they were at Full Sail, or Crockett and later WCW when they filmed in North Carolina and then later Orlando, where they would film several weeks of shows in a row. So him and Cornette only worked together for a couple of hours, but it was spaced out over several weeks, which I think kind of is a good rub, because I mean that was one of the top ranked managers at the time. But
didn't they pretty much told Cornette with zero notice?
Yeah, the way Jim Cornette tells it, Mike Halleck was getting ready to walk through the curtain, like he was at the gorilla position, and somebody tapped Cornette on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, you're managing this guy right now." Oh shoot, tighten my tie and let's get out there. So Cornette honestly thought it was a rib on him, but hey, it worked out, got everybody a little exposure, and here we are 30 years later still talking about it. So
right. And that's the thing is, he did make an impact. We're still talking about him.
Yeah. But transitioning from Mantar, one of the more famous bad gimmicks, Mike also wrestled as a member of the Truth Commission, which we'll get to. And he was Tank during that run. And he actually ended up in Memphis as Tank of the Truth Commission, defeating Jerry Lawler to win the USWA World Heavyweight Championship, which, I mean, that's a huge rub. Anybody beating Lawler clean back then.
Yeah, I think if there's any fact checkers out there, you can correct me, but I believe it was March 15th, 1997 in Memphis that he won the title. I believe he dropped it the following Monday night. So he had, but still, I mean, the guy went to his grave knowing that he was a world champion.
Yeah, it still counts. And that was, the USWA was a very respected promotion. That wasn't some throwaway title in your friend's garage like that. That's a prestigious championship to win.
Yeah, it had a certain amount of prestige to it. And if you look at the winners, the previous title holders, I mean, all pretty decent wrestlers.
That's very true, and all good names. But like I mentioned, Tank, the Truth Commission. We want to transition because we talked about this, you and I, over obviously since Mike's passing, how we were going to honor him tonight. So we talked about him, but since Mantar and his connection, and then the Truth Commission, he's tied so strongly to bad gimmicks. We wanted to do that, and it's been a long time since we've done a show, just us,
Right.
and we wanted to talk tonight about bad gimmicks. And there is, anybody that's watched wrestling for more than a few minutes knows there is a lot of them. But you and I, we threw some names out. We picked and chose. And I'm going to give you first go because you brought up a group that I had completely forgotten about until you said something.
You mean the Ding Dongs?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to let you talk about that wonderful idea.
All right. And I had also had forgotten about these guys. My BWC brother, Hunter Hagee, reminded me about this was Jim Hurd's, I guess I would not say finest creation, but they were built from Belleville, not Belleville, Illinois, but Belleville, USA. They had ridiculous orange costumes, with bells, and they actually wore bells on their wrists, which actually they weren't very well put together because they actually became shrapnel in the ring because they'd always fall off.
Right.
And but they were a very brief run. They were annihilated in a squash match by the Skyscrapers, and then they were unmasked. Which now, I mean, unmasking to me is how often does it happen? Not very often, and it should mean something.
Right.
But they unmasked these guys, and it's like two jabronis. Like, I don't know these guys.
Yeah.
So it really didn't mean anything. I guess they wrestled somewhere else I can't think. It was Rock and Roll something. But and their names were Sartori, and I can't even remember the other guy's name now. But but when they were unmasked, nobody knew who the hell they were.
Right.
And that was really it. And I have a note here that if you look up the term drizzling shits in Webster's Picture Dictionary, you'll see the Ding Dongs.
Well, I got curious and I double checked. They were the Rock and Roll Rebels.
There you go. Okay. But it was Sartorius, and it was I can't think of the other guy's name.
Sartain.
Sartain, I was close.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Notorious.
Rick Sartain and Greg Evans were the
Okay.
Which, of course, I mean, like you said, Jim Herd, the entire point, and if you listen to commentary in their match, the entire point was just, other than someone to laugh at, was to give the announcers a few moments to make ding-dong jokes. Whole thing was just terrible.
Of course, then Bailey revived it, 30 years later.
Right. Yeah, but at least they hers was a hair different.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't really that bad either. It wasn't that they were so bad. It was just the gimmick absolutely sucked.
No, not at all. And speaking of talent saddled with bad gimmicks, the one that first jumped to mind when you and I were throwing names out was the Red Rooster. That was the one my first thought, because that was Terry Taylor. Now, little known fact, wrestling fans out there, when the character Mr. Perfect was first created, when the writers, or I should say the creative was first coming up with Mr. Perfect, Terry Taylor was supposed to be Mr. Perfect. Kurt Hennig was actually choice number 2. And Terry Taylor had talent. He was a respected veteran. He worked well. He didn't hurt people. He had a good style. He had a good look. But the Red Rooster was exactly that. The red mohawk, I'm not going to do the crowing, but
poetry in motion.
Yeah, it was awful. I mean, like you were saying, when we talked about it, Terry Taylor transitioned from 40-minute Broadways for the NWA title to a red mohawk losing to the Brooklyn Brawler.
Right. Feuding with Steve Lombardi.
Yeah. Having legitimate athletic competition. I mean, he has that win over, he's got that win over Bobby Heenan, but even that was a competitive match. It was a legit joke, and there was no salvaging that. And I want to transition for a second. When Terry Taylor left and later on in his career and ended up in the early days of WCW, he had a gimmick called the Tailor-Made Man that a lot of people forget about. And the tailor-made
And for good
man,
reason.
it was, I mean, listen to this, Benny. This is an entirely original idea for those that don't remember. The tailor-made man was a millionaire who wore a gold suit with dollar signs on it and came out with his manservant and would pay the crowd to do crazy things. And he unheard of. I'd never seen anything like that before, not counting Ted DiBiase, the years leading up to it. So clearly tailor-made man wasn't based on anything, but that was another gimmick people saw right through. So poor Terry Taylor, phenomenal talent, just saddled with bad gimmicks. And the Red, if you cannot talk bad gimmicks without bringing up the Red Rooster.
And like you said, now the guy in Mid-South was the North American champion, which the North American Championship in Mid-South Wrestling was a very prestigious territory title.
Mm-hmm.
And, having that title meant whenever the NWA champion was in town, they got the title match. And that's when he wrestled Ric Flair at the New Orleans Superdome. That match is on YouTube. That is a great match. I mean, very competitive match. And Flair won. I think it was like in 42 minutes, but a tremendous, tremendous match. And, he goes from that to, like you said, wrestling Steve Lombardi. And
right.
I really think it's one of those things where like the wrestler wasn't bad. The gimmick was just awful. And it really ruined him going forward.
It did. And, that's funny that we throw we throw poor Steve under there because he was another good talent in the ring that was saddled with some crap gimmicks.
Oh yeah.
And we're gonna get to his poor run, but one of the things that worked when we talked gimmicks at the time was you mentioned obviously in the era of Mantar, that was an era when it seemed like everybody had a job. Now one of the first podcast interviews I ever did was with Duke Drosy, who was a garbage man, Duke the Dumpster. I'm not going to talk about him. That was a great interview. He's a great guy. The fact that he had a foot amputated and came back to wrestle later, Kerry Von Erich style. So I got nothing against him. But in the era of Duke Drosy, there was another gimmick that I thought really stood out to me. And it's a shame because we talk about talent. There's a guy named Tony Anthony wrestled throughout the South as the Dirty White Boy.
Dirty White Boy, yes.
And when he came to the WWF, he had the agreement. He was working for Jim Cornette at the time, and Cornette traded some talent back and forth with the WWF. They gave him the gimmick of TL Hopper. Do you remember what TL Hopper's job was, Benny?
He was he a plumber, I think?
He was a plumber, and he would come out with the plunger and try and use it as a weapon. And he was a wrestling plumber, and it was horrible. And that's another one in the same vein as Terry Taylor. Phenomenal talent that it's just an awful, awful gimmick. I mean, you always got to talk about the marquee test, headline WrestleMania, Bruno Sammartino against TL Hopper wrestling plumber. Like what at no point, no matter how good you are, is that gimmick ever going anywhere past the side show that no one's watching.
Well, I heard that TL Hopper got arrested.
Yeah.
You know why?
Why is that?
He had 25 pounds of crack under his jeans. It's one of those things that you really think about it. Like, why did they do that? Like, when they created this gimmick, what did they think? Did they think it had any kind of long-term future? Because obviously it didn't. I mean, how long did they think it was going to last? Sometimes I think these gimmicks were created more for Vince McMahon's amusement than anything else.
Well, it's funny because in that era, you had all these people with gimmicks, and other than Duke Drosy, who winning a match against Hunter Hearst Helmsley came out number 30 at the Royal Rumble that year. So, I mean, I call it a push, if you will, is all the underneath guys. Remember the show we did with Randy Hogan talking about the underneath guys? Every company had them. This new generation era that the WWF was going through, all the new generation talent, all the underneath guys had jobs. They had job-based gimmicks. Duke Drosy, TL Hopper, Salvatore Sincere, Freddie Joe Floyd. You had all these guys that were just like you said, there's no way you put the sketch pad together and come up with a wrestling plumber and think this guy's anything. And again, it's such a shame because Tony Anthony is a phenomenal talent.
Right.
And I've never heard anything said bad about him as a person, but you get saddled with this horrible gimmick that can't possibly go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously no long-term future in it. Like, well, I always wonder, like, what did they think? How long did they think it was? Did they create it for a short term? You know, you would think that when you create a gimmick, it's
Right.
for, it's going to last at least for, I don't know, a year or two.
Yeah. No, that's very true. But you talk about creating gimmicks that you know aren't going to last. I go back. I said one of the first interviews I ever did was with Duke Drosy. My first show as primary host when I was working with our old program was a panel. I was hosting a panel show, and Rico Constantino wrestled. Obviously,
Oh, yeah.
Rico. Everybody loves Rico. He was on there, and we were talking about religion in wrestling. And you cannot talk about religion in wrestling without bringing up the Friar Ferguson gimmick. And that was one of those gimmicks that whether it was going to last or not, it ended pretty quickly because there was legit heat. Religious groups were reaching out to the WWF saying, hey, what is this crap? I mean, here's this fat friar with his little notepad sitting on people. And that was rough. But
And he was smelly too, wasn't that part of the gimmick?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And speaking of being gross, he transitioned, Benny. Do you remember who Friar Ferguson transitioned
He
into?
was before that. It was Bastion Booger, right?
Yes. Or I should say transitioned from. And Bastion Booger, do you remember the true, I mean, we always talk about legend being used too often, but do you remember the true classic Survivor Series match? Bam Bam Bigelow, Bastion Booger, and the Head Shrinkers against the Four Doinks, who ended up being the Bushwhackers and Men on a Mission in clown makeup. That was a different time.
Stuff.
Different time for gimmicks back then, Benny.
And before that, he was Norman the Lunatic, and then and I think his real name was Mike Shaw.
Yeah.
Okay, so he went from Norman the Lunatic, then he was Trucker Norm, and then he came to WWF as Bastion Booger, and yeah.
That's where people go to die. Gimmicks go to die. That is
Right.
But Benny, I'm going to give the next one to you when we were throwing names out because you always throw the baseball references. What's a good baseball gimmick that you?
Okay, so you take a guy like Steve Lombardi, solid wrestler, career wrestler, never like in the main event, but just solid, always put on a good match, and then you paint his head, red, white with red stitches. And I think at first they called him MVP. He was the original MVP. Mm-hmm. And then I think after that they called him Abe Knuckleball Schwartz.
Yes. Yeah, during they tried to use him to get some heat from the baseball strike.
That was in 1994, right? That was during a strike, I believe.
Yeah, because he had the baseball themed, like he would do the safe sign and slide in his matches, and then wrestlers never go on strike.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that was one that what was the shelf life of that one?
Well, as soon as the strike was over.
But I mean, God bless Steve Lombardi because he transitioned. I mean, he was the Brooklyn Brawler. He was, wasn't he Kimchi as well?
Yes, yeah, for Kamala, and he was one of the many wrestlers that put on the Doink makeup.
Okay.
In between. The Doink transitions. Speaking of which, Dark Side of the Ring episode, phenomenal episode.
But I mean, God bless the guy. I mean, he got cashed a check for like 30-something years, so I guess he did something right.
And it's funny. There's a funny story. I don't know if you remember because you really didn't watch the main product. There was a run in the late, I want to say the late teens, mid to late teens of wrestling where they had the Raw special guest host. And every week it was some celebrity, everybody from Freddie Prinze Jr. to William Shatner to Bob Barker, Betty White, you name it. Every week there was some special guest host.
Wasn't Steve-O one of the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they had anybody, either they liked wrestling. They, or maybe it was just a random person. Like, I'll admit, William Shatner his episode had no business being that good. But there was a moment during that era when the Zack Ryder character started getting over. Really, really over, like huge over. And of course it was organically, so they had to bury him. But before that happened, the one of the special guests was Hugh Jackman. And, I mean, we talk about, Tony Award winning, huge star, right? Hugh Jackman comes out and the crowd starts chanting, "We want Ryder." So he goes back and he gets Zack Ryder, and there's the whole thing. But the story goes that Hugh Jackman was a wrestling fan, and he didn't know that a lot of the older talent work in the back as agents and producers and all. And he was talking about being worried that he wouldn't know a lot of the wrestlers, and they said that he pretty much fangirled over running into Steve Lombardi backstage, because he's like, "Oh my God, the Brooklyn Brawler." And here's this award-winning actor who's like one of the most beloved people in Hollywood swooning over the Brooklyn Brawler because of how fond he remembers him.
Yeah.
So sometimes it sticks just right,
Right.
But what else you got, Benny? What are you thinking?
Okay, so how about the gobbledygooker, who I guess, like, for weeks and weeks we saw this egg on TV, which I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, actually hatched in the 1990 Survivor Series.
That's correct.
And so, as bad as that was, and it was Hector Guerrero, correct?
Yes, it was Hector Guerrero. Yeah.
Okay, who I think, was that before or after Lasertron?
Before or after what?
Lasertron.
I don't remember.
A couple of bad gimmicks, but so I mean, that's the bad news. But the good news was that was also the debut of the Undertaker, and
yes.
I saw something online with Mark Calloway where he thought, like, he knew that he saw this egg, and he thought he was going to come in as the Eggman. He was scared to death that, like, that was going to be his gimmick, that he was going to have to hatch out of this egg. Thankfully, he didn't.
The gobbledygook, and of course, one of the I don't want to say gimmick, one of the quirks of the gobbledygooker, with all his turkey, chicken, whatever the hell he was supposed to be, was Mean Gene Okerlund spoke gobbledygooker. So he was out there interviewing him while he's doing the cluck dance and making bird noises, and it was bad all around.
I hope he had a hell of a payday.
That's what would I now that we're on YouTube, Benny, how much of a bonus would it take for you to do a gobbledygooker episode for me?
I mean, I'd do anything. I don't care. I mean, I have no shame.
Like, still, although I don't know, you never did get your mask back from your infamous cousin.
He's still MIA. Yeah.
Still hiding in the mountains.
Oh, I don't know where the guy is now. Yeah.
But yeah, we transition, we joke. One of the other gimmicks that came up, and it's kind of a unique story in itself, was the gimmick of Saba Simba, and that was your idea. So I'm gonna throw you that one to you.
Yeah, and I had to do a little bit of research. I'm thinking, like, why in that? Who did Tony Atlas piss off to have to do that? But as it turns out, he really didn't. I mean, I guess for a while there, he was homeless, and I'm not sure. I don't even know the backstory behind that, but came back to Vince McMahon, said, can you give me some work? And I guess they were going to bill him as the African warrior, and somehow it evolved into Saba Simba. And I remember watching, I think I don't know if it was his debut or not, but Roddy Piper actually said, that's Tony Atlas, and he started laughing. But that was I think he lasted for one pay-per-view. Yeah,
he was in one of the Royal Rumbles.
Okay.
And he came out third or fourth and was eliminated pretty quickly. But yeah, it's funny because it's one of those gimmicks, and this is a term that's going to come up a lot tonight. It was very racist, very racially insensitive. Here's this big, Tony Atlas, Mr. America, like, everybody. I mean, and wrestling fans, their memories, they're not stupid. They know who that is.
No,
but he comes out and he had the flowery headdress, and he came out with the spear and the shield, and he did the dance, and it was awful. But like you said, that gimmick, Tony Atlas credits that gimmick with saving his life, because the Saba Simba money is what he used to get back on his feet and basically get back into having a life again, because he was borderline homeless and broken and destitute. And
it's a shame, maybe like 7 or 8 years later. I mean, he could have been part of the Nation of Domination if it, the timing was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with a different gimmick, but
oh yeah, absolutely.
Which the Nation of Domination is a great example when you look at everybody from Rocky Maivia to what is it? I almost said Kamala, Kama, the fighting machine, Mark Henry with the whole American Pride gimmick that just didn't quite click, and then Sexual Chocolate. I mean, pretty much the Nation of Domination all had terrible gimmicks at some point too.
Right. Yes, they did.
But yeah, it's rough. But we talked about Mantar and Saba Simba, and one of the gimmicks that it came up, and you and I both said it the same way. We remember the famous Tony Schiavone call. Now we're going to bounce around a lot in history, so we're going from the 90s to Hulk Hogan leaves WWF, joins WCW, and he's in a feud with a group called the Dungeon of Doom. Now, the Dungeon of Doom was literally just a collection of bad gimmicks designed to try and replicate the Monster of the Week, lightning in a bottle that Hulkamania had in the WWF. And here he is at the pay-per-view. He's fighting, Kevin Sullivan and the Shark and the Zodiac, and we're going to get to some of these gimmicks later. And here comes a giant mummy. But it wasn't a mummy, Benny. It wasn't a mummy at all. Who was it?
The Yeti?
The Yeti.
The Yeti, right.
Yeah. Old Tony Schiavone, or Schiavanto, the Yeti. And this mummy-looking goober gets in the ring, and I don't know if it was supposed to be a bear hug, but he looks like he just starts humping Hulk Hogan, and it's awful. And then, of course, the Yeti transitioned into a phenomenal gimmick after that when he was Super Ninja Destroyer. Everyone remembers Super Ninja Destroyer.
Oh, yeah.
But you cannot have this era. I mean, you look at the Leprechaun and the Shark, and I mentioned the Zodiac, and we could do an entire show just on the Ed Leslie gimmicks, and we're going to get to him in a second. But it was just bad gimmick after bad gimmick after bad gimmick. And you got to think, Benny, you're building up Hulk Hogan, biggest star in the world, biggest paycheck in your company, and you're going to put him in the ring with who dressed the Yeti and was standing next to this mummy at gorilla position and said, "Pay-per-view gold, get out there."
They must have had stock in Johnson & Johnson adhesive tape is the only thing I can think of.
It's so bad. So bad. But I mentioned the Zodiac. Poor Ed Leslie. So people forget you had Hulk Hogan, and obviously there were some names. We've talked about people on the show like Jimmy Snuka, and there were some people that were very big, but there was a period towards the end of the Hulkamania era where you could argue the second biggest star in the company, or biggest face in the company, I should say, was Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
Oh, absolutely. He was hugely over, yeah.
Hugely over, merch selling like crazy, Intercontinental Champion, headlining paper. I mean, granted, I'm sure being Hogan's friend helped. But, and then, of course, there's the transition. Brutus Beefcake started as the evil Chip and Dale gimmick of sorts, and then slowly transitioned into the Butcher with the tassels and the clippers, because he started cutting hair. And then who can forget, the rocker splitting up and the barbershop window. But Ed Leslie leaves. He follows his buddy Hulk Hogan to WCW, and I'm just going to run down this list. So he becomes. They can't call him the Butcher, or excuse me, they can't call him the barber. Yeah. So he becomes Brother Brutai, and it's just a generic Hulk Hogan friend, Brother Brutai. Then Hulk Hogan starts getting attacked by this masked man, and during this time, Brother Brutai transitions into the Clip Master. That was very, very short-lived. So then the masked man gets unmasked, and it's Brother Brutai, and now he's the Butcher.
The
And
Butcher, right?
Starcade 1994, the largest non-WrestleMania pay-per-view in the world, Starcade, and the main event is Hulk Hogan defending this title against the Butcher. That was WCW in 1994. I mean, who goes into that thinking there's even a 0.01% chance the Butcher is winning
what were the Vegas
WCW
odds
title?
on that one for the Butcher?
Yeah. So poor Butcher. Then Butcher loses, not just the match, loses his memory. Butcher becomes the man with no name. You remember the man with no name, Benny?
I'll have to really go back and look for that one.
Well, you can join the rest of wrestling fandom, because I have been in conversations with people who were in the business at the time, and they forget.
And they forgot him.
They forget this because at this point, the Butcher kind of does a babyface turn. And so the other Kevin Sullivan and his followers, they beat him down. They beat him so bad he's got amnesia. So man with no name. Then he starts wearing a mask because he's so beat up. Man with no face, they call him. Fun story there. Awful. So this is five terrible gimmicks back to back, right? So then introduce a new member of the Dungeon of Doom, and it's a character called the Zodiac. Face painted, yes, no, yes, no, with his everything is backwards. Another awful gimmick. I would say his promo skills improved because no one could yell yes or no with that kind of conviction. But so I mean, here you had this horrible gimmick that was goofy, and things were already lost. He was part of the Tower of Doom cage match. We're going to get to the rest of that junk later. But big plot twist, Benny. It's as Vince Russo would say, it was a swerve, bro. The Zodiac was a plant. He was a spy working for Hulk Hogan this whole time. You know who he really was, Benny?
He was the Booty Man, wasn't he?
He was the Booty Man.
That's
the
right.
butt-loving Booty Man, whose finishing move was a high knee to the face. Get it, Benny?
The high knee.
That is
knee.
the epitome of writing right there.
Oh, yeah.
And so the good old Booty Man, and of course everybody remembers that clip of Hulk Hogan yelling "Booty, booty, booty."
Oh yeah.
So the Booty Man kind of fades away. The NWO exists, and all of a sudden Hulk Hogan introduces his new friend, the Disciple, Big D, bearded. A lot of fans didn't even know that was Ed Leslie because of the beard and the glasses and the vest. The Disciple was kind of Hogan's lackey for this run. So, I mean, this was 9 bam, 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 bad gimmicks in a row. I mean, the Disciple, I wouldn't say that was a bad gimmick. Just, I mean, every group needs a silent thug that's a lackey to get beat up while Hulk Hogan runs away. But poor Ed Leslie. We could have done a whole show just on his bad gimmicks.
Those 9 gimmicks. What was the time span of those 9 gimmicks?
Just under 2.5 years. Because it was about 3 years. Because 1993 to 1996 when he turned with the NWO. So
maybe like the average shelf life of each gimmick was 4 months.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah.
But
4 months too long as well.
4 months too long. Well, what do you think, Benny? What you got on your list over there?
Who else do I have here? I have now. Here's and we had him on our show. Kizarny, Sin Bodhi.
Yeah.
Another phenomenal talent. And he even said that the character itself should have been booked a lot differently. He thought it should have came in as an evil Carney instead of
right.
what it was. And it obviously didn't last very long either.
No, not in the slightest. But there's another one like Steve Lombardi, like Tony Atlas. When we interviewed Sin, he had nothing. He didn't regret, no lost sleep or anything over the Kizarny gimmick.
No, his whole thing was he thought he should have came out and wrestled somebody named like a Tajiri and just annihilated him in a squash match. And just booked, as this evil Carney guy. And obviously, he had that one match on TV versus MVP that he went over. And MVP was, I think, in the midst of a losing streak. and he was almost becoming a baby face.
Yeah, that was part of the gimmick MVP was going through at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, and the other thing I thought of though, like, because I've given it a lot of thought over the years, is that how could you even understand the guy? I mean,
Right.
the vignettes, he didn't really speak a whole lot. It was like, you can kind of figure out what he was, Kizat and Kizandy, you can kind of figure out what he was saying. But if he cut a whole promo, I like, what the hell did this guy say?
Right. That's funny.
But again, another very, very talented guy, tremendously talented guy.
Yeah.
Just not a good gimmick.
No, not in the slightest. Speaking of talent, bad gimmicks, the one of the ones that came up early in our conversations was he still wrestles today, still one of the best pure talents on their roster in AEW is Dustin Rhodes. And of course, he made Goldust work. He was evidence that a gimmick that could have faltered and fallen apart, and he did everything he could with that. But your fans bear back, Benny.
Yeah, the Tony Rose fan club.
But no amount of talent could have saved when he transitioned to our friends at WCW as Seven.
Uncle Fester.
And good old Seven. And you know what? I originally wanted to put Black Rain on my list. His run in TNA as the Goldust knockoff, right. But Seven was worse.
And what was that whole deal when he came out as Seven and he pretty much crapped on the whole gimmick?
Yeah, they had done the vignettes with him in the window and the white mask and the hat, and it was supposed to be this mysterious, spooky character. And then here comes Seven, and the first words out of his mouth are, "Look at all this crap they're making me wear."
I think he mentioned Uncle Fester.
Yeah, he cuts a whole promo on how terrible this gimmick is, and I'm so insulted to come to this company and be saddled with this garbage. I mean, talk about dead out the door.
Was that what you would call a worked shoot?
Yeah, well, WCW had a lot of those back then.
Right.
I mean, I remember watching I'm trying to remember which show it was, but Goldberg, it was Goldberg, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner. They were all in the main event. And there was Goldberg got jumped, and the announcers straight up to Shivani and who was the trying to remember who he was talking to, but they start talking like, wait a minute, this isn't in the script. Who's that attacking Goldberg? Goldberg's supposed to finish this match. And it was stuff like that. They tried to peel back the curtain constantly, and it just all fell flat.
But again, here's a man who's is still wrestling 33 years later.
Yeah.
Great talent, survived all these gimmicks.
Oh, absolutely. Still bringing it. And made it work. I mean, you saw that with poor Cody Rhodes and Stardust, how easily the Goldust gimmick could have failed.
Yeah, like you said, he made it work. I mean, yeah. I would not consider that a bad gimmick at all.
No, not at all. And even remember the Attitude Era Goldust when he had the green and he'd come out with the ball gag, Luna'd have him on the chain,
Is that when he had Tourette's?
Kind of, yeah. But then you end up you see stuff like when they paired Goldust with Booker T, and just pure gold in their backstage gimmicks. Like, it's just he could make everything work. And of course, the story where Dustin Rhodes actually offered to get breast implants as the Goldust character, and WWF turned him down, said that was too much.
Oh, I didn't know that. Jeez.
But
it's funny though, we're talking about Cody as Stardust and Dustin as Seven, and then you got Dusty Rhodes with his polka dot gimmick.
Yeah. You know what, though? Polka Dot Dusty Rhodes was one of the most over stars in the business at the time. He made it work.
Yeah.
Coming out with that
I
dance.
enjoyed it. And even Sapphire. I enjoyed Sapphire.
Yeah, I forgot about Sweet Sapphire. That stripper leather policeman's hat that he'd come out wearing.
Yeah.
Who else you got on your list, Benny?
Let's see. Okay. And again, another absolutely phenomenal talent that Barry Windham one of the greatest wrestlers, in my opinion, of the 80s. I mean, you take a Mount Rushmore of the 1980s, you got to put Barry Windham on there. He was one of the top three. And then you book him as the Widowmaker and then the Stalker.
Right.
And I don't know how long that lasted. Then he became one of the Blackjacks, right?
Him and Bradshaw, the new
Right.
Blackjacks.
But again,
and that's a shame. I think they had it. I mean, obviously that wouldn't have gotten over the same way the original Blackjacks did. But I think they both had a look. I think if handled correctly, the new Blackjacks could have worked.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
I mean, and Barry Windham is one of those guys. Do you remember the West Texas Rednecks?
Oh yeah, of course.
You know, Kurt Hennig and Barry and Kendall Windham and oh no. Help me out, Benny. Who was the fourth West Texas Redneck?
It was Kendall, Barry, Kurt, and I can't think of the last one.
I know Virgil Vincent was with him for a little bit as the Curly Bill character, but
Oh, I'm having a brain freeze here. Rap is crap.
Oh, Bobby Duncombe Jr.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, we both lose a point for that one.
Yeah, demerits.
But speaking of that era of WCW, so here's somebody that made it work. They brought in, because this was, of course, everybody wants to talk about it, the transition during the ECW days when WCW signed Mike Awesome when he was still ECW champion. And
Right.
that was, I mean, the Monday Night War is still serious business back then. So they bring in Mike Awesome, one of the best young talents, dominant ECW, huge following, and they saddle him with just bad stuff after bad stuff. And I want to focus on the two that stick out to me. One you brought up, and that was his Fat Chick Thriller era.
Yes.
When he would come out with the, let's say, hefty ladies.
Well fed.
And then, of course, he was the 70s guy with the disco suits and the crazy dance. I mean, here's a guy that could have been a champion, a legit champion in that era against anybody. Mike Awesome could have had dominant matches against the stars of WCW. You could have put him in there with Goldberg and DDP and Nash. You could have, if he had been in WWF with your Steve Austin and The Rock, he could have done it all. But instead, he's a disco dancing fool and a man who prefers women on the plus size. How does that happen, Benny?
And I mean, like you said, the guy had the look, he had the skills. I mean, he was the complete package.
Yeah. Just awful. I mean, you talked about that. How do you get that to that point where you're going to take this talent? Like, who looks at the Fat Chick Thriller and sees that headlining a pay-per-view marquee somewhere?
You know, I'm going to use, I've done, like, for the last 15 years, a number of home shows in the Tampa Bay area. And one of the things I do is people watch. And
Right.
I'll watch somebody walk by with this ridiculous outfit. And I'll think to myself, okay, like, they went home, you know, they were at home in the morning. They they got dressed. They looked in the mirror and they said, I'm good. You know, and by the same token, he's like, you know, what are they thinking? Like, Fat Chick Thriller. Like, oh, I'm good. You know, no.
Yeah. Awful. You know, I mean, they can't look at that, Benny. That not everybody can be as shazzy dressed with you and your
Man.
Charlie Harper shirts over there.
Oh yeah.
Hey, you know, all jokes aside, though, the very first two comments we've gotten since we've joined Monty and the Pharaoh on YouTube have both been female fans throwing themselves at you.
You got to wait in line.
I mean, we've been doing audio for almost 3 years now. We finally get to video, and turns out you're the looker of the group.
I know. Go figure, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to need to start blurring my face on some of these videos.
I'll have to start wearing that mask again.
Well, when you find your cousin, you can get it back.
You better buy one on Amazon.
all those years ago. But
now we got to bring up Shockmaster. We can't do the show without bringing up Shockmaster.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. How's it go? Our partner is going to shock the world.
Oh yeah. And I've watched that video at least 100 times, and it's like the painting of the dogs playing cards. You look at it the 100th time, and you can see something you didn't see the previous 99 times.
Right.
You can always pick up a sound bite, like the Ric Flair in the background saying, "Oh God," and then somebody else saying, "What did he fall?" Like, that's the understatement of the century.
And you can hear the laughter. And it's one of those things where everybody remembers the Shockmaster. He bursts through the wall, falls over, his sparkly stormtrooper helmet falls off. And that was Fred Ottman. I mean, Tugboat and Typhoon. So, I mean, you've got a good background there. A big man that can move, that can work. But let's say for a second, Benny, that Shockmaster doesn't trip. He bursts through the wall, and he comes in and he's going to cut that promo. And there is a stormtrooper helmet painted sparkly and an oversized sleeveless jacket. And it's a dubbed over voice. Obviously, he's not talking. And correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it? Is someone?
The voice was Ole Anderson.
Yeah, that's it. I wanted to say it was one of the Anderson brothers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But let's say hypothetically, Benny, I'm going to put you in the shoes of the booker for a second. So, Shockmaster, Sting, our partner is going to shock the world because he is none other than the Shockmaster. The wall explodes. He bursts through. He doesn't fall. Do you still take that stormtrooper helmet, jacket wearing goof looking guy seriously?
I mean, his head looked like a potted plant. I mean, and I mean, they should have capitalized. They should have started selling the Shockmaster vests. That would have been a big celebration. That's something that nobody has ever really speculated. That's a great question. Like, what would have happened if the guy actually didn't fall? That's really something that could be debated. Like, how long would the gimmick have lasted then?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have been. You could drop the helmet and push him as the powerhouse like he was supposed to be.
Right.
Before he became that, they basically used the fall and made the Shockmaster clumsy as part of his gimmick. But
would that have outlived RoboCop?
I don't know. RoboCop ripped the cage, the door right off that cage.
He really did, yeah.
And you know what? RoboCop's another great example. If you watch him walk to the ring, he trips over one of the power cords going by the ramp, and he almost eats it. Like, you can see he kind of drags and catches his foot. Imagine if RoboCop had Shockmastered himself coming down the aisle.
Oh yeah.
Like, what do you do at that point?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny. So okay, but speaking of that era, another one that jumps out. This was, WCW was having some crazy gimmicks. They were going through some times, but they had some talent. WCW takes a beating because they had Steve Austin. They had Triple H. Well, I guess he was Terror Rising back then, or Terror Rising, one of the two.
Terror Rising.
Yes, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. You had some of the biggest stars in the company, and they just didn't know what to do with them, or they were green and they didn't let them grow before they moved on to other pastures.
Didn't they have Edge as Sexton Hardcastle?
Yeah, Edge wrestled with them for AJ Styles towards the end of their run with the company. But during this period, they had some talent. But I want to talk about Kevin Nash. Of course, my favorite Kevin Nash gimmick was Super Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. But that's just because I'm 40, so that was perfectly targeted to me at the right age back then.
Now, was that before Master Blaster?
That was I believe that was in between Master Blaster and Vinny Vegas was those gimmicks. But
and was that before Oz?
I was just about to get to that one, Benny. I'm going to let you talk about Oz. What do you think about that?
That is the most, to me, that is the most hideous, horrible gimmick ever. Like, where did they come up with that? And how did that not ruin? I mean, I give a lot of credit to Kevin Nash for outliving that one.
Yeah. I mean, with the green robe and Merlin coming out with, I believe that was Kevin Sullivan under the Merlin costume.
Yes, it was. Yes.
And I mean, you talk about like you said, doomed for failure. There is no way anyone not under the influence of something illegal to buy in my state thought that was a good idea.
I mean, was there a room full of yes men? Like, I mean, did not anybody say, you know what, this really sucks?
Well, don't forget, this is also some of the same leadership that wanted Ric Flair to abandon the Ric Flair gimmick and become Spartacus.
Spartacus, that's right. Yeah.
Dye his hair or cut his hair. I mean, and be the Roman. And of course, we saw with the first main roster WWE run of Karrion Kross how well the Spartacus gimmick could work.
Right. Where they put a little cleft in his chin, like so you get the Kurt Douglas look.
I'm Spartacus.
Yeah.
But I will say, Master Blaster, awful. Oz, awful. Vinny Vegas, where he would shoot the dice and had the, hey, yo, Vinny, oh, the obvious goofy voice. I think that they could have maybe done something with that. Kind of like when they had Scott Hall as the Diamond Stud.
Right.
I mean, Diamond Stud's not going to headline Starrcade. Well, I mean, the Butcher headline Starrcade. So clearly the bar wasn't very high, but Vinny Vegas could have been a TV US champ. I could have seen that working, which I give Kevin Nash credit when they approached him for joining the WWF, and he went to WCW management and said he didn't feel like wrestling anymore. He was going to go back to his bouncing and doing some other stuff, and they let him go. And that weekend he was on a plane to Stanford.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed Vinny Vegas.
Yeah,
wasn't he hooked up with DDP at that time? Or no?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
I have this vague memory of him and DDP doing something. Maybe not.
I don't know. But I mean, you had some gimmicks that back then that shouldn't have worked that did. I mean, one of my favorite WCW talent from that era was Johnny B. Bad. Mark Marrow. And Johnny B. Bad, he originally debuted as a fighting Little Richard impersonator.
Right.
People forget that part. I mean, granted, that was only for a few days before they kind of transitioned to the party and the stick that shot the confetti and how to put this politely, flamboyant nature of the character. I mean, remember when we did our classic pay-per-view review, we kind of glossed over some of the inappropriate things said during his match.
Yes.
But Johnny B. Bad was a gimmick that shouldn't have worked, and it did. And he was hugely over and hugely successful. But I don't know. I want to talk, though, because this is something we got to in the beginning. When we talked about Saba Simba and some of these gimmicks that haven't quite fit, because a lot of them, Kerwin White, when they had Chavo in the WWE as the if it ain't white, it ain't right. The golfer with the fake blonde hair and the golf cart, and you had some gimmicks that were just purely racial trash. And I want to talk because as we get towards the end of the show, you mentioned when he transitioned away from Mantar, Mike Halleck joined the Truth Commission as Tank. And of course, the Truth Commission had characters that would go on to be Kurgan and Bull Buchanan. And of course, the second manager of the Truth Commission, the Jackal, is currently in AEW, Don Callis. A lot of people forget that's who that was. But I want to talk about the Truth Commission for a second, because there was a period in WWF history, the Gang Wars, when the original Nation of Domination, which included Crush and Savio Vega, when they had their split, Crush formed the Disciples of Apocalypse. Savio Vega formed Los Periquas, which were Puerto Rican wrestlers. And then here comes the Truth Commission. And the Truth Commission were based on the commission from South Africa. These were apartheid enforcers. Right. So, I mean, you're talking about one of the most racist, horrible government forms of government in the modern era. I mean, I'm not even going to get into the evils. I don't want to give it the time of day. But somebody greenlit creating a faction of literal jackboot thugs designed to enforce and honor the truth of a South African racist government. Even modern day Vince McMahon wouldn't have greenlit that, right?
Was that how far after Colonel De Beers was that?
I'm not sure, actually.
Because that was the same kind of gimmick in the AWA, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. The I guess because the Truth Commission debuted in '96.
Yeah, so it would have been like way after, because De Beers
Yeah.
would have been like in the mid to late '80s. So why would they revive that when? You're right.
I don't know.
I mean, what were they thinking?
Well, I think it's interesting because I mentioned the Jackal being the second manager, because their first manager, the Commandant, he wasn't a wrestler.
No,
The
he was an
Commandant
actor, right?
yeah, Robert Smith. He was a South African actor. He had crossed paths with Bret Hart, and Bret Hart was the one that pitched, "Hey, this guy is really good. We can do something with him." And of course, they're like, "Oh, you're South African. Great, you're going to be the general of a South African militia." And of course, they ended up replacing him with the Jackal because they wanted a manager that could take bumps, and he was not a physical competitor. Excuse me, losing my voice talking all this horror. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is in every history book. It's funny because the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, what they were supposed to be inspired by, was actually a good thing. People forget that part. You know, this is a group that was set up to give a voice. The end of apartheid, we're going to give a voice to the good people. But then you bring in the Truth Commission, and they're heels. They're based on the force that would have kept the Truth and Reconciliation Commission away. Like, I just can't wrap my mind to this day. Whenever people talk about bad gimmicks, that always jumps to the forefront because it was just in such poor taste. It was in such it was bad timing, because you figure 1995 is when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed. So, I mean, a lot of the reformations, the end of apartheid, the peace that came after, a lot of that was already in motion by the summer of '96. And then here's these evil South Africans. It would be the equivalent of bringing out I hate to say it, but you remember the Muhammad Hassan gimmick?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, here was a guy, he was Muslim American in an era post 9/11 America. Like, I'm mad at the way I'm treated in post 9/11 America. And absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, there were stories of like Sikhs getting attacked on the street just because they looked wrong, even though the turban, completely different religion. And what did they end up doing with Muhammad Hassan, Benny? Not only was he a heel, but it turns out he was an actual terrorist the whole time.
Right.
It's awful. Like,
it's another like phenomenal talent that just was wasted.
No, absolutely.
Mark Capani, I think is his real name.
Yeah.
I think he's a principal now. Like,
I was about to say, he just made news recently for being his school profile was updated.
Right. I mean, thank God he landed on his feet, but they could have done so much more with him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's funny because it's when you and I sat down and we were throwing ideas back, and there's some we're not even going to get to tonight as we wrap up. But how many of the gimmicks that we talked about, this is bad, were racist, like based where they were just racially insensitive, they were racial in nature, awful stuff. But sometimes it's blind. I want to end on a do you remember we talked about it earlier when I was talking about the Zodiac and the involvement of the Dungeon of Doom? They were in that Tower of Doom multi-tier cage match. It was Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage against pretty much the entire heel roster of WCW. The alliance to end Hulkamania, where the Four Horsemen teamed up with the Dungeon of Doom, and they brought in some enforcers, including old Z Gangster, who was the former Zeus, Tony Lister. And they had their other big man. And he was called, when he first debuted, he was called the Final Solution. And you don't need a history book to know why that is a bad idea. And that's one of those things where you miss it. You say, I mean, how does that get through? It's not like that's one person coming up with that idea. There's an entire team. There's the product angle. There's the people that make the graphics. You have somewhat of a writing staff. You have bookers and agents in the back. How does it get that far where he is on TV, named after the order that instituted the Holocaust, and no one thinks, hey, that's a good idea, or that's a bad idea? How does that happen?
I mean, who's in charge?
Just awful stuff.
It's not like it's a small promotion. This is a major organization.
Right.
That this is going on.
This was
all the way to the top.
Yeah, WCW was, and this was, like I said, this was this was pre-NWO, obviously, because they were still trying to run with the Hulkamania stuff. But they rebranded him the Ultimate Solution before the pay-per-view. And of course, he would go on to play Bane in Batman and Robin. So, I don't know which is worse, but he had. I mean, there comes a point when you see some of these gimmicks, and we talked about it a lot when we were shooting ideas back and forth. Like, how does it happen? But I'm going to throw the final thought to you, Benny, as we wrap up. Bad gimmicks. What are you thinking?
There's just so many of them, and the sad thing is, for a lot of these great wrestlers, it really, I mean, Terry Taylor, he never recovered. I mean, Barry Windham, well, I mean, he was kind of, a little bit further along in his career. So, I mean, but he never ascended to the heights he did when he was in the, in the NWA. It's a shame that a lot of these things, I mean, I guess that to a certain extent it's cool because 30 years later we're laughing about them and these people are still relevant to a certain extent. But
that's true.
Do you want to be thought of that way? Does Terry Taylor want to be known as the Red Rooster? Does Tony Anthony want to be known as TL Hopper? I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't want to be.
I will say I saw Fred Ottman at a wrestling convention about a year ago, and I would say half the merchandise at his table was Shockmaster themed.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're going to make money on it.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, if you have any kind of pride, are you really going to be happy
maybe,
with that?
Maybe you love it, maybe you don't. I will give them credit though. WWE, when they had their Legends line, as some of the figures that have come out through the years, when they did a Legend Shockmaster figure, he was upside down and backwards in the box. So it was him falling over falling out of the package. Yeah, it was good stuff. But no, you're right. Some of these guys never recovered. Some of them, it's unfortunate that how much talent goes to the wayside because.
Mike Halleck, I mean, the gentleman we started with, I mean, he was out of wrestling probably on a full-time basis by the time he was 30.
Yeah.
And I mean, he could have gotten a lot more mileage out of his career. I think, Mantar really kind of put the kibosh on his career.
I mean, he came in to the biggest company in the world at the time and was saddled with a gimmick that they knew. I mean, like I said, the comments Jim Cornette made following Mike's passing, they knew from day one this isn't going to work.
Right. But the thing is, like, it would be one thing if you had a Giant Gonzalez kind of guy who had limited skills. This is a guy who was like good enough to be considered for the Olympic team in wrestling.
Right. Yeah, it's sad, Benny. It is. And, as much as I love this conversation, it's sad that how this episode came about with Mike's passing. And that's unfortunate. Let's see, we're in July right now. It's almost coming up on the end of July. Our next episode will be the first week of August. And how many episodes this year have we started with a memorial section already?
It's way too sad. It's scary. I mean, who's going to be next?
I mean, obviously we talked about Mike just in recent weeks with the Iron Sheik and Billy Graham. And it's just, I hate to cycle back to it. There was a good line years ago. They said, you hit that point in life where life stops giving you things and starts taking them away.
Well, two of the gentlemen, Mike Jones aka Rocky Jones, Mike Masters,
Mm-hmm.
and Dominic from our show have passed away since they've been on our show. And then, Mike Halleck, who is going to be on the show tonight, has passed away.
Yeah. It's
scary.
It's sad. It
is. And it's very sad. You're right.
And we wanted to focus when we spun off and did this show. Remember, we wanted to focus on. So I mean, it's on our tagline. Celebrating wrestling storied past. You got to hear the stories before it's too late. How many stories, Dominic? And I mean, we've had, like you said, with we started with Dominic DiNucci, and how many great interviews are out there with Billy Graham and the Sheik, and then obviously on so you look at some of the guests we've had on our show when the time comes down hopefully many years down the road, some of the great stories we've heard that would never have been told if people weren't given the opportunity like what we're doing.
Absolutely.
You want to hear it. So I tell you, it's good stuff. And for the YouTube and our podcast audience, another great episode. Benny for the original Long Island Iced Bee, Benny Scowl. I'm Dan Spasha. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.
See you at the matches.